This action research project was undertaken in a Stage 3 composite Year 5 and 6 class at Regents Park Public School throughout my 30 days of practicum. This project was completed with the incorporation of the MEE framework for engagement. My project focused on identifying the impact of differentiated lessons and incorporating collaborative learning activities as a way to engage the students in their learning. My focus question was, how can I make my teaching more engaging by introducing/building on collaborative activities in my teaching and classroom? This is my submission page, which consists of my Weebly address and my university email address. I've also displayed the declaration to confirm that everything in this assignment is written in my own words. My action research focus question is, how can I make my teaching more engaging by introducing/building on collaborative activities in my teaching and classroom? I chose this specific question as I feel it's extremely important for students to be engaged in their learning. I feel as though this was a struggle for me in my first practicum, so I've decided to strive on this in my second practicum. These are the research questions which I have addressed throughout my action research project. I undertook my action research project during my second practicum at Regents Park Public School. Regents Park Public School is located in a suburb in Western Sydney in the state of New South Wales, Australia. Regents Park is located 22 kilometres west of the Sydney Central Business District in the local government area of Cumberland Council and Canterbury Bankstown Council. The inner city suburb has a good representation of cultural diversity and has a population of around 4,926 people. Regents Park has an enrolment of approximately 275 students across K-6 classrooms. Approximately 88% of the student population at Regents Park Public School are categorised as EALD learners. The school caters to these students by allocating each classroom with the School Learning Support Officer, SLSO. The SLSO officers rotate between classrooms and individually work with the EALD students to help improve their learning abilities. The school has a supportive unit which focuses on assisting the students with special needs. The school also offers a school counsellor and a learning and wellbeing officer who deals with the students who are misbehaving and creates programs to encourage good behaviour. During my practicum, I was allocated a Stage 3 Year 5 and 6 classroom consisting of 28 culturally diverse students. Within the classroom, there were various diverse learners, majority being EALD learners who range from emergent to advanced. The students were allocated different academic groups for both literacy and numeracy depending on their academic abilities. My mentor teacher was an extremely hard-working individual and has 10 years of experience as a primary teacher. She began working at Regents Park Public School immediately after she graduated from university. She began her teaching career in an early Stage 1 classroom and has been teaching Stage 3 for the past 4 years. She was extremely helpful and assisted me in successfully completing my action research plan. Throughout my first practicum, I was given the opportunity to experience teaching a classroom with a range of diverse learners. Due to this, I needed to differentiate my teaching strategies in order to cater for all the students. During the completion of my first practicum, I was able to identify that during class activities, the students were constantly demotivated and disengaged. I felt as though this was an issue, as there was no valuable learning taking place. This influenced me to conduct a research project to discover if the implementation of a different teaching pedagogical approach would assist with gaining the students' interest in their work, which I then incorporated in my second practicum. During my second practicum, I focused on the MEE framework and incorporated more collaborative and engaging learning activities in the classroom. I ensured that my lessons and activities were both educational and engaging to ensure the students were cooperating in all classroom activities that were taking place. This action research project provided me with an insight into the different teaching strategies that needed to be incorporated in a classroom. It provided me with the opportunity to experience differentiating my lessons to cater for all the students. I instigated my second practicum with the idea that my planned lessons would cater for all the students. However, this wasn't the case. As I moved into my practicum, I began to understand that students learn differently and that it's the teacher's responsibility to identify how their students learn and implement those ways into the classroom. In this case, I focused on understanding the students and identifying their preferred way of learning at the beginning of my practicum to ensure I cater for them all. Within this experience, I was able to identify that for the emergent learners, It was extremely beneficial to incorporate concrete materials such as blocks, counters, and dice, as they were used as visual aids, which assisted them in their learning. Whilst for my advanced learners, they preferred to use paper and pen as they found it more challenging. I was also able to identify that the incorporation of collaborative learning activities within the classroom ensured the students were engaged in their learning. My overall aim was to make my teaching more engaging by introducing and building on collaborative activities in my teaching and classroom. Prior to beginning the Action Research Project, I obtained full consent from the Regents Park Public School principal and my mentor teacher in order to be able to collect student data during my 6 weeks of practicum, which was done for ethical purposes. Within the data collection process, I chose to collect data from all of the students in the class, as I didn't want to limit my findings to a specific group of students. My 4 chosen ways of collecting student data include observational data, work samples, student reflections, and student assessment. All samples were annotated and allowed me to identify the students' learning experiences. Observations. Observations was a critical component of my student data collection, as I spent my first week of the 6-week practicum taking observational notes in order to get to know the students and how they learn. During my observation, I noted down the different ways the students learn, their attitudes towards learning, each student's academic level and their overall level of engagement in classroom activities. I used this data to compare the students' attitude, engagement, and participation level towards individual learning and collaborative learning. Work samples. Whilst the students were working, I took pictures of their work samples when working both independently and collaboratively. This allowed me to compare the students' level of interest and engagement in both independent and collaborative work through analysing their overall experience. It also allowed me to understand how engaged the students were in the activity, as well as how much the students understood the content being taught. I collected various work samples within the classroom. These work samples included their writing work samples as well as their maths work samples. These work samples allowed me to identify if the students have succeeded the overall learning intention of the lesson. Student reflections. At the end of each lesson I taught, I provided the students with time to reflect on their overall learning experience. I composed a bunch of reflection questions that the students were required to answer and share with the class. These reflections helped me view if my lesson was satisfactory in the sense that the students were participative, engaged, and motivated in their learning. Student assessment. At the end of each topic, I incorporated a student assessment in order to identify if the students have understood the overall content. For instance, after focusing on fractions and decimals for 2 weeks, I created a mini diagnostic test which the students were required to answer individually. This diagnostic test assisted me with identifying as to whether the students have understood the concept and which students needed additional support. This was extremely useful as it provided me with an insight into the students' level of knowledge consumption at the end of each topic. My focus question for key findings is, did introducing and building on collaborative activities make your lessons in classroom more engaging? Through the analysis of my student data, I was able to identify that incorporating collaborative activities did in fact make my lessons more engaging. The students seemed to enjoy the use of concrete materials and ICT during their learning. The incorporation of collaborative learning allowed them to share and generate new ideas with one another. My research project allowed me to come to the realization that the more creative my lessons were, the more students are engaged and the higher the level of participation. I was able to discover that if the lessons weren't differentiated to cater for the students' different academic abilities, the students were both disengaged and demotivated. For instance, if the lessons were too advanced for the emergent learners, they would be completely confused, disengaged, and unfocused, which means no learning is taking place. During my observation stage, I discovered that the students showed no interest in learning from worksheets and textbooks. However, they enjoyed participating in their own learning experience. They showed the most engagement when concrete materials, ICT, and hands-on learning were incorporated within the lessons. I believe that the students responded well to the collaborative activities that were introduced within the lessons. They displayed a more positive attitude towards their learning and education when they were working collaboratively in comparison to when they were working independently. I was able to identify that the collaborative activities made my lessons more engaging as there were more student participation in classroom activities. It is evident through this research project that collaborative activities and learning and the incorporation of concrete materials and ICT are innovative approaches to increase student engagement and learning. Analysis of student data suggests that incorporating collaborative learning enhanced students' engagement. Lau and Gotzi, 2012. Observations that were collected display both the incorporation of both small e and big E in the MEE framework focusing on engagement. This displays that the students demonstrated high operative learning skills. Observation 1 was a teaching note of a maths lesson that focused on addition and subtraction. The lesson began with an independent activity before moving on to a whole class discussion. During this observation, I was able to identify the students' knowledge on applying mathematical strategies. However, I came to the realization that the students were more engaged and motivated in their learning when the lesson involved collaborative learning with the incorporation of hands-on activities. These observation notes were beneficial as I then applied them into my lesson planning and ensured I incorporated these strategies to increase the students' level of engagement. Research shows that allowing group work can transform students' learning experience. Blumenfield, Marks, and Soloway, 2006. Observation 2 is my personal reflection after the completion of the lesson. I use these personal reflections as a guide when planning and programming next lessons. These are a way of improving my teaching strategies and lessons to create a better learning environment for the students. Overall, this depicts that the students responded well to the teaching strategies, however required more collaborative learning in order to maintain the engagement level. Furthermore, the positive attitude that students displayed was present in lessons that involved collaborative learning with the incorporation of hands-on activities. The following work samples I collected while completing my research project display how the students have related to the MEE framework, focusing on the small e aspect of engagement. Within these work samples, it is evident that the students successfully participated in the student-centered learning approach. According to Sparrow, 2000, student-centered learning allows the students to control their own learning, which is said to increase student motivation and engagement. As shown in Working Sample 1 and Working Sample 2, students are working in groups to experiment with both 3D shapes and oobleck. In Work Sample 1, the students were involved in using nets to construct different 3D shapes. This lesson was introduced after the students demonstrated an understanding of 3D shapes and their overall properties. This particular activity was highly effective as the students were engaged, participative, focused, and enjoyed their overall learning experience. Once the students finished constructing the different shapes, they came to the realization that nets are the important basic elements of 3D shapes. In Work Sample 2, it is evident that for science, the students were learning about states of matter. In this subject, the students were investigating how the states of matter can be both changed and manipulated. Due to this, they were involved in planning and conducting a scientific experiment in which they created oobleck. During this experiment, they were investigating as to whether an object can have two states of matter at the same time. The students displayed a great sense of enjoyment and interest as it was a more hands-on lesson. This activity was also highly effective as the lesson was educational and covered the syllabus outcomes. However, the students were also having fun. In Work Sample 3, the students were using the infinities to research information regarding the Sichuan earthquake. This lesson was highly operative as the students were involved in a learning experience which allowed them to be more independent learners. This was an individual research task as it allowed me to identify which students were able to comprehend a text and identify the key information. Overall, these 3 lessons were all student-centered lessons as the students were given control over their learning. As displayed within the images, the students were extremely engaged and participative in all 3 lessons. The students' work samples also depict their real-life learning experiences in their writing, which was portrayed during the creation of their poetry booklets. As shown in Work Sample 4, the students were involved in creating a poetry booklet incorporating various poetic techniques. Before this, the students were required to create a plan on A3 paper. The students were extremely engaged in this lesson as it allowed them to express themselves through poetry. This was an independent task which gave the students control of their own learning, which again relates to the student-centered learning approach, Sparrow 2000. This lesson again relates to the MEE framework as it was highly cognitive, as it provided the students with the opportunity to implement their deep knowledge and think deeper in relation to creating their poems. This activity assisted me with identifying if the students had the ability to use their creativity to create poems with the incorporation of poetic techniques. In Work Sample 5, the students were focusing on the effects of tobacco on the human body. In this case, the students were required to complete an independent research task in order to identify both the positive and negative effects of tobacco. After the completion of this lesson, the students felt extremely confident as they were able to explain the consequences of tobacco. It was a highly cognitive lesson as it encouraged the students to think hard and gain deep and valuable knowledge. During this research task, the students were incorporating personal examples which demonstrates the students' level of understanding and connection towards their learning. This clearly aligned to the MEE framework by successfully achieving the Big E engagement. Overall, students demonstrated high cognitive and high operative engagement levels through their finished work. During the tasks, students shared ideas and were engaged in content-related discussions throughout the majority of the lessons. Student reflections consisted of the students' responses to the questions I provided them. At the end of each lesson, I allowed the students to reflect on their overall learning experience by constructing a response to a question. It is evident through the reflections that the students were more engaged in the lessons that involved collaborative learning, as they liked the idea of sharing their ideas and responses with a partner. This element of sharing ideas was extremely beneficial as the students were given two perspectives and provided with additional information. The reflections allowed me to reflect on both the students' learning and my own overall teaching to allow me to identify the teaching strategies that the students are benefiting from. As shown in Reflection 1, the students have shown highly effective engagement as he has stated that he enjoyed the cooperation of ICT and collaborative learning in the lesson as it made the lesson more engaging. This is crucial because the only time learning is taking place is when the students are engaged. Student Reflection 2 provided me with an insight into what knowledge the students gained during that specific lesson. This allowed me to identify if any valuable learning is taking place with my chosen teaching strategy. Overall, these student reflections were extremely beneficial as it provided me with an insight into how the students are responding to my teaching strategies and as to whether I should make any adjustments in order to better the students' overall learning experience. Student assessment was another form of student data collection that assisted me with identifying if the students have succeeded their learning intention and have understood the content being taught. If this was have to be a negative outcome, this would indicate that I would either need to alter my teaching strategies or implement more engaging lessons. Student Assessment 1 commenced at the end of our 2-week focus on fractions and decimals. During these 2 weeks, the students were focusing on adding and subtracting fractions with the same denominator. Due to the students being diverse learners and obtaining different academic abilities, I provided each student with a differing goal that they are required to strive to achieve by the end of the topic. This final assessment would provide me with the information regarding the students' overall knowledge capacity on fractions, which then allows me to identify if the students have achieved their goals. The student assessment was highly cognitive and highly operative as it made the students obtain the quality of work thinking and working hard. Overall, the student assessment was extremely beneficial at both the beginning and end of a lesson. At the beginning of the lesson, it allows you to identify the students' prior knowledge, whereas at the end of a lesson, it provides you with the insight into as to whether the students have consumed new knowledge and information. My final research question is, what conclusions did you draw from this project? Overall, my research findings have proved how collaborative learning activities have a positive impact on students' overall level of engagement and learning. It also allowed the students to share ideas and assist one another during their learning journey. It was evident that it assisted with the enhancement of the students' cognitive, operative, and effective levels of engagement. Munns, Martin, and Sawyer, 2005. I was able to identify that when I incorporated hands-on activities, concrete material, and ICT, the level of engagement and participation dramatically increased. Findings also portrayed that throughout all my lessons, the students were on task instead of off task, which depicted that valuable learning was taking place. Through my overall research project, I have displayed that I have incorporated the MEE framework as a way to improve the students' overall learning experience. My final focus question is, how did the focus group members assist one another? Each member in the focus group were extremely helpful and provided each other with constant feedback, support, and guidance. We all motivated each other to progress into the practicum as well as the action research project. We communicated through WhatsApp as it was a convenient way to communicate with one another. See Appendix 2.